My name is Damian Miller, 33 years old, a software engineer living in Boston. My life, if I had to describe it, is probably a series of quiet, repetitive days filled with computer screens, cold coffee, and autumn streets covered in golden leaves. I'm not the type who enjoys noise or standing out. I like stability, simple things like an evening watching old movies or a hot cup of tea when it's raining. But if there's anything that makes my heart beat faster, it's Claire, the girl who came into my life like a gentle breeze, soft but powerful enough to turn everything upside down. I met Claire 2 years ago at a tech conference in San Francisco. I remember that day clearly. The conference hall was crowded, the stage lights blinding, and I was sitting in the back row, quietly jotting down notes that hardly anyone else cared about. Claire appeared on stage, not as the main speaker, just an assistant introducing a renewable energy project. She wore a white button-up shirt, simple jeans, her hair tied up high, and a smile as bright as sunlight streaming through a window. Her voice was gentle but firm, as if she were telling a story she believed in completely. I don't know why, but I couldn't take my eyes off her. After the conference, I mustered all my courage to talk to her. I'm not great at socializing, so the first thing I said was probably ridiculous. You explained renewable energy really well." Claire laughed, her brown eyes sparkling as if she knew I was trying my hardest not to embarrass myself. "Thanks," she said, "but I bet you didn't understand a thing about wind turbines, did you?" We laughed, and from that moment our story began. Claire is different from me in many ways. I'm quiet, content in my comfort zone, while she's like an open book, always ready to embrace everything. She never shows off, doesn't wear expensive jewelry or designer clothes. She prefers walking over driving, eating sandwiches from food trucks over dining at fancy restaurants. Once I asked her why she chose to live so simply, and she just shrugged. "I want to be myself, Damien. Not something others expect me to be." But that simplicity became an issue when I thought about introducing Claire to my family. My family. How do I put it? They're not like me. My mother, Eleanor Miller, is a sharp woman who takes pride in our family's status. Though that status is just a big house in the Boston suburbs and a few social connections she loves to brag about. My sister Rachel is a carbon copy of our mother, always judging people by their appearance, their education, their job, or even the brand on their clothes. Then there's Uncle George, my mother's younger brother, notorious for his sarcastic remarks that nobody wants to hear, but everyone has to endure. I know my family has a classist mindset. They expect me to date someone worthy, a doctor, a lawyer, or at least the daughter of a prominent family. When I mentioned Claire, I deliberately kept it brief, saying only that she works in the environmental field, likes simple things, and that we met in San Francisco. Even so, I could hear my mother clicking her tongue over the phone. "Environmental work? That probably doesn't pay much, does it, Damien?" she said, her voice dripping with skepticism. Rachel was more blunt. "What school did she go to? What do her parents do? You need to be careful. Don't let someone take advantage of you." I tried to explain that Claire isn't that kind of person, but they wouldn't listen. Every conversation left me with a lump in my throat. Claire, unworthy? She's the only person who makes me feel like I can be myself without pretending or trying to please anyone. But I knew bringing Claire home wouldn't be easy. My family would scrutinize her, from the way she dresses to the way she speaks. And that terrified me. One evening, as Claire and I sat on the sofa in my small apartment, I hesitantly asked, "Hey, would you want to come to my place for Thanksgiving?" I tried to keep my voice casual, but inside I was as nervous as if I were facing a major exam. Claire looked up from the book she was reading, her eyes sparkling. "Really? You want me to meet your family?" She smiled, but I could see a hint of worry in her eyes. "I'm not sure they'll like me, Damien. You know, I'm not exactly glamorous." "I don't need you to be glamorous," I said, taking her hand. "I just need you to be you." But deep down, I knew the problem wasn't Claire. It was my family. I'd seen how they treated people who didn't meet their standards. Once Rachel mocked a colleague of mine just because he wore a slightly worn shirt. My mother once refused to invite a friend of mine to a Christmas party because her family doesn't have any notable name. I didn't want Claire to endure those judgmental looks or words, but I couldn't keep putting it off. I wanted them to see Claire, to see how wonderful she is, and to hope, however faintly, that they'd change. Claire nodded, still smiling. "All right, I'll go, but don't worry too much, I can handle it." She said that, but I noticed a slight hesitation when she mentioned her own family. "Don't talk too much about my parents, okay? I just want things to be simple." I agreed, but a sense of unease stirred in me. In the days leading up to Thanksgiving, I called my mother, Rachel, and even Uncle George, trying to prepare them. "Mom, Claire's amazing. Please don't ask her weird questions, okay?" I practically begged over the phone. My mother chuckled, her voice sweet but laced with sarcasm. "Oh, Damien, I just want to know who this girl is. Why so nervous?" Rachel was more direct. "If she can't handle a few questions, she probably doesn't fit with our family." Uncle George, as usual, just laughed. "Let me see this golden girl of yours." I hung up, my heart heavy. I knew they wouldn't easily accept Claire, not because of who she is, but because of their preconceived notions. Claire, on the other hand, was carefree as she prepared. She said she'd bring a homemade pumpkin pie and chose a simple outfit, a dark green knit dress and a light jacket. "I don't want to overdo it, Damien," she said, her eyes bright. "I just want them to see me, not something else." But I knew my family would misinterpret Claire's simplicity. They'd look at her knit dress and think she couldn't afford designer clothes. They'd see her pumpkin pie and assume she had ulterior motives. And that was what scared me, that my family would hurt her, and worse, that they might push her away from me. A few nights before the trip, I lay awake for hours, my mind a tangled mess. Claire slept beside me, her breathing steady, her hair spilling over the pillow. I turned to look at her, wondering if I was dragging her into a battle she didn't deserve. Then she opened her eyes as if sensing my worry. "You okay?" she whispered. I nodded but said nothing. She took my hand, squeezing it gently. "It'll be fine, Damien. Worst case, they don't like me, but you still like me, right?" I laughed, pulling her close. "Like? I love you, Claire." She chuckled, pressing her cheek against my chest. But deep inside, my fear didn't fade. Thanksgiving was approaching, and I knew it wouldn't just be a family dinner. It would be a test, not only for Claire but for me, to protect her and to prove that our love was stronger than any prejudice. Thanksgiving arrived faster than I expected, like a cold Boston breeze carrying both golden leaves and my growing anxiety. Claire and I left the apartment early in the morning, loading our luggage into the trunk of my modest Lexus. She brought along her homemade pumpkin pie, carefully placed in a sealed container on the back seat. The sweet, warm aroma of the pie, tinged with a hint of cinnamon, filled the car, momentarily easing the knot in my stomach. Claire sat beside me, wearing her dark green knit dress and a light jacket, her hair tied up as usual. She hummed an old song, her voice soft, but I could tell she was trying to stay calm. So was I. "You okay?" Claire suddenly asked, turning to look at me. Her brown eyes sparkled, but I caught a fleeting glint of worry. I smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "I'm fine, I want everything to go smoothly." She nodded, saying nothing more, but I knew she understood. Claire was always good at reading my emotions, sometimes better than I could myself. The drive to my mother's house in the suburbs took over an hour. The house came into view at the end of the road, looking grander than it actually was thanks to a fresh coat of white paint and a meticulously maintained wooden fence. My mother had always taken pride in this house, as if it were proof of our family's status. I parked the car, took a deep breath, and turned to Claire. "Ready?" She smiled and shrugged. "Readier than you, that's for sure." Her words made me laugh, but moments later my heart pounded as the front door swung open. My mother, Eleanor, stood there in a beige silk dress, her silver hair neatly pinned up, her smile polite but unable to hide her scrutinizing gaze. Damien, my dear, she called, stepping forward to hug me before immediately shifting her attention to Claire. And this must be Claire. Her voice was sweet, but I knew that sweetness all too well. It was like the frosting on a spoiled cake. Claire stepped forward, her smile radiant, and extended her hand. Hello, Mrs. Eleanor. Thank you for inviting me. My mother took her hand, but the handshake was brief and cold. Oh, it's nothing, dear. Come in, don't catch a chill. We stepped inside, greeted by the aroma of roasted turkey and mashed potatoes filling the air. The living room was decorated as it was every year. Hand-embroidered tablecloths, expensive porcelain dinnerware, and flickering candles on the dining table. Rachel, my sister, stood near the fireplace, a glass of red wine in hand, her eyes sharp as knives as they landed on Claire. Uncle George, with his potbelly and smirking grin, was sprawled in an armchair, telling some story that made a few relatives burst into laughter. The atmosphere was warm, but to me it felt like a trap waiting to spring. Claire placed her pumpkin pie on the kitchen counter, carefully opening the container. The sweet aroma wafted out, so enticing that even Rachel turned to look. I made this pie, Claire said, her voice soft but confident. I hope everyone enjoys it. My mother glanced at the pie, her eyebrows rising slightly, then gave a faint smile. Oh, homemade? They sell excellent pie crust mix at Whole Foods, don't they? Her tone was light, but I caught the subtle jab. Claire just smiled, unfazed, but I felt my face flush with anger. I wanted to say something, but Claire touched my arm, shaking her head slightly. Let me handle it, she whispered. Dinner began shortly after. The extended family gathered around the table. My mother, Rachel, Uncle George, Aunt Linda, and a few distant relatives I only saw during holidays. Claire sat beside me, still smiling, but I noticed her slight tension, her hands clasped tightly under the table. I held her hand, hoping to give her some courage, though I was the one who needed it most. The conversation started innocently enough, about the weather, my job, and Uncle George's new car, but I knew it was only a matter of time before they turned their focus on Claire, and as I feared, my mother struck first. So, Claire, she said, slicing into her turkey, you work in the environmental field, correct? What exactly do you do? Her tone was curious, but I knew she wasn't genuinely interested in the answer. She was fishing, looking for an opening to judge. Claire set down her fork, smiling. Yes, I work on renewable energy projects, mainly researching climate science and ways to optimize wind and solar energy. I love my job because it helps protect the planet. Her sincerity made me want to stand up and applaud. But my mother only nodded, her lips pursed. Sounds interesting, she said, but her eyes flicked to Rachel as if sharing a secret. Rachel smirked, sipping her wine. Renewable energy, huh? Sounds idealistic, but it probably doesn't pay much, does it? The air at the table grew heavier. I felt my grip tighten around my glass of water. Claire remained calm, but I saw her eyes darken slightly. Not always, she replied, her voice still gentle. But I think doing work you love is worth it. Rachel gave a small scoff, and Uncle George, as always, jumped in with a blunt joke. What's the point of ideals if they don't pay, little lady? The table erupted in laughter, except for me and Claire. She smiled, but it wasn't as bright as before. The dinner continued, and things only got worse. My mother started talking about Amanda, my ex-girlfriend, a surgeon she always considered exemplary. It made my stomach churn and sweat bead on my forehead. Amanda just got promoted at the hospital. Did you know, Damien? She said, her voice brimming with pride, as if Claire weren't sitting right there. She's such a smart girl from a respectable family. Her words sent my heart racing, sweat prickling my skin, but before I could respond, Rachel jumped in, adding fuel to the fire. Exactly. You need someone more practical, Damien, not some dreamer working in environmental stuff. I glanced at Claire to gauge her reaction. I expected her to clench her fists, for her eyes to flash with anger, but no, she calmly sliced her potatoes, her gaze as serene as a still lake. I, on the other hand, wanted to scream, to tell them to stop. Claire seemed to sense my turmoil. She placed her hand on my thigh under the table, squeezing gently. "I'm okay, love," she whispered, her voice soft but steady. "Let them talk." I couldn't fathom how she stayed so composed. Every jab from my family felt like a knife to my heart, yet Claire sat there, smiling as if she were used to dismissive looks and provocative remarks. The tension eased for a moment, but then Uncle George, who never knew when to keep his mouth shut, launched another attack. "So, Claire, where'd you grow up? Your accent sounds kinda country, doesn't it? Not like a city girl." He burst out laughing as if he'd just told a brilliant joke. A few relatives chuckled along, and I saw Claire take a deep breath. "I grew up in the suburbs, not far from here," she replied, her voice still gentle. "But I love Boston. This city has so much life." Uncle George raised an eyebrow, sipping his beer. "Yeah, but not the fancy part of town, right? Doing that environmental work, I bet you're not exactly rolling in cash." I couldn't take it anymore. I set my fork down, ready to stand, but Claire gripped my hand tightly. "Damien, it's fine," she said, her voice quiet but firm. I looked into her eyes and saw a strength I hadn't fully noticed before, but inside my anger was boiling. I knew my family was wrong, judging Claire just because she didn't flaunt wealth, wear designer clothes, or drive a luxury car. What hurt most was that I couldn't protect her, couldn't make them stop. The dinner dragged on, each minute feeling like a century. My mother kept talking about Amanda, about girls who know their worth. Rachel relentlessly probed Claire with invasive questions. "What school did you go to? What do your parents do? Anyone in your family notable?" Claire answered briefly, tactfully, but I could see her eyes dimming, as if she were holding something back. I gripped her hand under the table, hoping she could feel that I was there, that I didn't agree with them. The breaking point came when Uncle George, tipsy from his drinks, blurted out, "Hey, Claire, you're here to score a golden ticket, right? This family's not a bad one to latch onto." The table erupted in laughter, as if it were the funniest thing said all day. I saw Claire's face stiffen just for a moment before she smiled again. But this time, her smile wasn't warm. It was cold, like she was hiding a storm inside. I couldn't hold back any longer. My wine glass trembled in my hand, and I set it down firmly, loud enough to silence the room. "Enough," I said, my voice shaking but resolute. All eyes turned to me, including Claire's. I looked at her, my heart pounding. "Claire, can I tell them the truth?" She met my gaze, her expression a mix of worry and trust. Then she nodded, whispering, "Go ahead." I took a deep breath, knowing what I was about to say would change everything. "Claire isn't who you think she is," I began, my voice ringing out in the silent room. "She's the only daughter of William R. Hamilton, CEO of Hamilton Energy, a $6.2 billion renewable energy corporation. She could have shown up here in a Rolls-Royce, a Ferrari, or even her family's private jet, but she chose to come in my beat-up car. She could buy this house, this entire neighborhood, but instead she brought a homemade pumpkin pie because she wanted to be accepted as an ordinary person." The room fell deathly silent. My mother's eyes widened, Rachel's wine glass shook in her hand, and Uncle George's jaw dropped as if he'd been slapped. I looked at Claire, waiting for her reaction. She smiled, but her eyes were sad. "Damien," she said softly, "just for me. You didn't have to go that far." But I knew I did. I couldn't let them keep insulting her. My mother stammered, trying to regain her composure. "Oh, Claire, you're really—" Rachel cut in, her voice suddenly saccharine. "Oh, I'm so sorry if we said anything wrong. We just didn't know." Uncle George, still in shock, mumbled something about investment opportunities. But Claire just looked at me, then turned to them, her voice calm but sharp. "I'm not upset because you didn't know. I'm upset because no one here tried to understand a person just because I don't wear designer clothes or drive a fancy car." Her words hit like a punch. No one could meet her gaze. I held her hand, filled with pride but also a pang of pain. I knew this dinner wasn't the end, But I also knew Claire was stronger than anything my family could ever imagine. Claire's words hit like a punch. No one dared to meet her gaze. I held her hand, filled with pride, but also laced with pain. The room was so silent I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. Claire's words were like a stone thrown into a mirror, shattering everything. My mother, Rachel, Uncle George, they all sat there, their expressions wavering between shock and embarrassment. And then, the eyes of my family, people who had mocked her just minutes ago, began to shift. My mother was the first to break the silence. She cleared her throat, adjusted the napkin on her lap, and flashed a smile I knew all too well, the one she used when trying to win someone over. "Claire, dear," she began, her voice as sweet as sugar, "you're far too humble. If we had known you were Mr. Hamilton's daughter, we would have, well, welcomed you differently." She tilted her head, attempting to seem friendly, but I could see the pretense in every gesture. I mean, Hamilton energy. Who would have guessed, right? Rachel jumped in quickly, setting her wine glass down, her eyes gleaming as if she'd just discovered a diamond. "Exactly. Claire, you're just... wow, so incredible for living so simply. I mean, who could do that? Living like a regular person with an entire corporation behind you." She laughed, trying to sound warm, but the way she emphasized corporation made me want to grind my teeth. Just minutes ago, Rachel had mocked Claire for her environmental work, and now she was looking at her like she was a prize. Uncle George, who had just called Claire a freeloader, leaned forward, his smirking grin replaced by blatant eagerness. "Hey, Claire," he said, his voice slightly hoarse from the beer. "Hamilton Energy, right? I've got some friends in the energy sector. Maybe we should talk about investment opportunities. You know, I've got some experience myself." He winked, as if he and Claire were already old business partners. I felt my face flush with anger. Their change in attitude was so shamelessly abrupt. Just moments ago, they were ridiculing Claire's accent, her clothes, her job. Now, knowing she was the daughter of William R. Hamilton, they did a complete 180, acting as if they'd never said those hurtful things. I wanted to stand up, yell in their faces that they didn't deserve Claire's presence. But she sat there, remarkably calm. Her hand under the table still held mine, gentle but firm, as if reminding me she was okay. Claire smiled, but it wasn't the warm smile from before. It was cold, sharp, as if she was used to these kinds of charades. "Thank you, Mrs. Eleanor, Rachel, Uncle George," she said, her voice soft but clear enough for the whole table to hear. "But I don't think who I am changes anything. I came here for Damien, not to show off." She paused, looking at each of them, her gaze steady. "And I'm still the person who works in environmental science, still loves homemade pumpkin pie, and still doesn't drive a fancy car." The table fell silent again, but this time it was an awkward silence. My mother cleared her throat, trying to mask her discomfort by raising her wine glass to her lips. Rachel pursed her lips as if searching for something to say to salvage the moment. Uncle George let out a loud laugh, but it sounded hollow, like a wrong note in a symphony. "Well, Claire, you're one special girl," he said, his tone dripping with flattery. "I like that spirit, very independent." I looked at Claire, my heart pounding. I knew she didn't need my protection, but I still wanted to shield her. "Everyone," I said, my voice trembling but steady, "Claire doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. She's the most incredible person I've ever met, and I hope you'll respect her." I looked directly at my mother, Rachel, and Uncle George, hoping they could sense the seriousness in my words. My mother nodded, her smile strained. "Of course, Damien, I just wanted to get to know Claire better. I really like her." Her words sounded like an apology, but I knew she wasn't truly sorry. For her, it was just a way to save face. Rachel quickly nodded in agreement. "Exactly, Damien. I just wanted to make sure you're with the right person, and clearly Claire is amazing." She looked at Claire, her smile so fake I wanted to look away. Claire only nodded, not responding. She turned to me, her eyes softening slightly. "Thank you," she whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. But in her gaze I saw a trace of exhaustion, as if she'd been through situations like this too many times. "I'm not upset because they didn't know," she said quietly to me as the table shifted to another topic, a clumsy attempt to fill the awkwardness. "I'm upset because they never tried to understand a person just because I don't fit their mold." Her words cut like a knife. I wanted to hug her, to apologize for dragging her into this mess. But before I could say anything, my mother stood up, clapping her hands lightly. "Come on, everyone, shall we have dessert? Claire, your pumpkin pie is sure to be the highlight." Her voice was cheerful, but I saw her eyes flicker over Claire as if reassessing her. Rachel and Uncle George quickly chimed in, praising the pie they had mocked just minutes earlier. Claire stood up, brought out the pie, and cut it into slices with her usual care. Everyone took a piece, their mouths full of compliments. "Absolutely delicious, Claire. You're so talented. You have to give me this recipe." But I knew those praises weren't genuine. They were trying to make up for their behavior, to win her favor, not because they truly appreciated her, but because they now knew who she was, or rather what her family had. I watched Claire, seeing her smile at everyone. But I knew she was enduring, not just the earlier jabs, but the hypocrisy unfolding before her eyes. The dinner ended in an awkward atmosphere. My mother invited Claire to stay and chat. Rachel asked about her environmental projects with feigned interest, and Uncle George kept bringing up business connections with Hamilton Energy. Claire responded politely, but I knew she was only doing it for me. When we finally left the house, Claire hugged my mother, shook hands with Rachel and Uncle George, her smile still in place. But as we walked to the car, she let out a long sigh, leaning her head against the window. "You okay?" I asked, my voice hoarse with worry. She turned to me, offering a faint smile. "I'm okay, Damien. I just hoped they'd see me, not something else." I didn't know what to say, so I just held her hand, driving into the cold night. Inside, a resolve was forming. I wouldn't let Claire go through this again. And if my family wouldn't change, I'd be the one to stand up to protect her, not just today, but always. 6 months have passed since that tense Thanksgiving dinner. But the memory of my family's mocking glances and shameless about-face still stings like a scar whenever I think back. Claire, with her boundless compassion, never brought it up again. But I know it left a mark on her heart. Yet she chose to stay by my side, and that only strengthened my resolve. I proposed to her on a spring evening under the soft glow of streetlights on a quiet Boston street. No flowers, no expensive ring, just a heartfelt promise from my heart. Claire smiled, her eyes shimmering with tears, and said, "Yes, I do," before pulling me into a tight embrace. That was the moment I knew I'd found the woman of my life. Our wedding took place on a radiant summer day in a luxurious garden in the Boston suburbs. Claire wanted a simple ceremony, but her father, William R. Hamilton, whom I'd only met a few times, insisted on an extravagant event. "My daughter only gets married once," he said, his voice deep and authoritative. "Let me handle it." And he did. The garden was transformed into a masterpiece. White silk ribbons fluttering in the breeze, tables draped in hand-embroidered linens, and white roses exuding elegance. The guest list included faces I'd only seen in newspapers. Energy tycoons, politicians, prominent entrepreneurs. I stood there in a tailored suit, the first I'd ever worn, feeling like I'd stepped into a world that wasn't mine. My family was there too, my mother, Rachel, Uncle George, and Aunt Linda. They arrived with strained smiles, dressed to the nines as if trying to blend into this powerful crowd. But I could see the unease in their eyes. My mother, usually proud of her jewelry collection, looked diminished next to guests wearing gold watches and designer evening gowns. Rachel, who always boasted about her refined taste, kept adjusting her dress as if afraid she wasn't standing out enough. And Uncle George, for the first time, was quiet, silently observing the crowd with a tense expression. Claire walked out in a simple yet graceful wedding dress, her hair flowing naturally, her eyes as bright as the day I met her in San Francisco. She didn't need jewelry or heavy makeup to shine. She was the light. I took her hand, my heart pounding, feeling like the world had narrowed to just the two of us. But as the ceremony began, I noticed the glances from the crowd, not at me, but at my family. A few guests, likely close friends of Mr. Hamilton, whispered and pointed toward my mother and Rachel. I caught snippets of their conversation. "That's the family that insulted Claire, right? So tactless." Another sneered. "Who do they think they are, looking down on Hamilton's daughter?" A surge of satisfaction ran through me. After everything they'd done to Claire, the mockery, the condescending looks, they were now tasting what it felt like to be judged. My mother bowed her head, pretending to be busy with her wine glass, but I saw her hands tremble. Rachel tried to keep smiling, but her eyes were filled with anxiety. Uncle George, the loudmouth braggart, stood in a corner, avoiding the gazes of the influential guests. Part of me reveled in it. They deserved this, I thought. They needed to know what it felt like to be belittled. But then I looked at Claire. She was talking to a group of guests, her smile radiant, but her eyes flicked toward my family, and I saw a hint of concern. When one guest, a middle-aged woman wearing a pearl necklace, made a loud comment audible to half the room. "The groom's family is so tactless, daring to insult the bride like that." Claire immediately stepped over. She placed a hand on the woman's shoulder, her voice gentle but firm. "Aunt Margaret, thank you for your concern, but that's Damien's family, and I'd appreciate it if everyone respected them. Today is a joyful day. Let's focus on that, okay?" The room fell silent for a moment. The woman nodded awkwardly and the whispers stopped. I looked at Claire, my heart tightening. She didn't have to do that. Didn't have to defend the people who had hurt her. But she did because she was Claire, always choosing compassion over resentment. I stepped closer, took her hand and whispered, "You didn't have to do that." She smiled, squeezing my hand gently. "But I wanted to, Damien. For you." The wedding continued with dancing, laughter, and heartfelt toasts, but I couldn't take my eyes off Claire. She moved through the crowd, speaking to every guest, from powerful figures to the waitstaff, with unwavering sincerity. My mother, Rachel, and Uncle George tried to approach her, their smiles strained. "Claire, you're truly a stunning bride," my mother said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Rachel chimed in, "You're the star of the party," but Claire only nodded, offering a polite smile without revealing any emotion. I knew she hadn't forgotten what they'd done, but she chose not to dwell on it, at least not today. As I watched my family surrounded by scrutinizing eyes, part of me still felt a thrill of vindication, but another part felt empty. I realized that revenge, however sweet, didn't bring me joy. What did bring me joy was Claire, the woman standing by my side, not just today, but for the rest of my life. As the reception reached its peak, William R. Hamilton stepped onto the small stage set up in the garden. Dressed in a black suit, his silver hair exuded authority, but his eyes softened with pride when they landed on Claire. He raised his glass, signaling for silence. The entire garden, from the powerful guests to the waitstaff, turned their attention to him, waiting. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his warm, resonant voice carrying across the crowd. "Today is a special day, not only because I get to witness my daughter Claire embark on a new journey with Damien, a young man I believe is worthy of her." He looked at me, smiling, and I felt a wave of warmth wash over me. "But also because today I want to share a story about compassion and the true value of a person." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, lingering briefly on my family. I knew he was referring to Thanksgiving, and my heart pounded, uncertain of what he'd say next. "When Claire told me she wanted to meet Damien's family last Thanksgiving, I was worried," he continued, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Not because I doubted Damien, but because I know my daughter. Claire has always chosen to live simply, never flaunting her name or our family's status. I feared she'd be judged, misunderstood. And as I feared, that's exactly what happened." The garden fell silent. I saw my mother lower her head further, as if trying to hide from his gaze. Claire squeezed my hand tighter, her eyes gentle but resolute. Mr. Hamilton went on. Claire was insulted, belittled, just because she didn't drape herself in the superficial trappings people often use to measure worth. But she didn't respond with anger. She chose silence. She chose compassion. And today, when I saw her defend those who once hurt her, I knew I'd raised a daughter who is not only intelligent but has an extraordinarily big heart. He raised his glass higher, his voice ringing with conviction. I want us all to learn a lesson from Claire. Don't judge others by their appearance, by what they wear or what they own. Look at their hearts, at what they do, at how they treat others, because in the end, that's what defines who we are. The garden erupted in applause. I looked at Claire, seeing tears glistening in her eyes, but she was still smiling. I turned to my family and saw my mother with her head bowed, Rachel covering her face, and Uncle George staring at the ground. They said nothing, but I knew they were ashamed. They'd learned a lesson they'd never forget, not from me, not from Claire, but from Mr. Hamilton, who had just reminded them that a person's worth lies beyond superficial measures. As the reception wound down, Claire and I stood side by side, watching the guests slowly depart. I hugged her, whispering, "I'm so lucky to have you." She smiled, pressing her cheek against my chest. "And I'm lucky to have you, Damien. No matter how your family is, I know you'll always be by my side." I glanced at my mother, Rachel, and Uncle George standing quietly in a corner. For the first time, I felt neither anger nor satisfaction. I only felt pity for them. People who had let prejudice blind them, but now, thanks to Claire and her father, had a chance to reflect on themselves. I held Claire's hand, stepping into our future, knowing that with her by my side, I could face anything.